An estimated half of the Bhutanese population is engaged in the agriculture sector. If, with a well-designed program, our youth were engaged in building a robust water management infrastructure, it would be of long-term benefit to the country. His Majesty the King. Kuzuzongbola, welcome to your UN House and to the 36th session of Bhutan Dialogues. The world is not on track to achieve the SDG Goal 2 of zero hunger by 2030. Bhutan's agriculture sector is the backbone of rural society, engaging 57% of the national workforce. Climate change is having a negative impact on farming communities and food security. Apart from the impacts of heavy rains, flash floods, landslides and fierce windstorms, agriculture faces adverse consequences from rising temperatures and temporary water scarcity as rainfall patterns change, particularly in the rice-growing areas. It has never been more important to come together to ensure that we build a nation that is not only happy, but also healthy, resilient, and self-reliant. Our topic today is securing what we eat. Our speaker is Dr. Kinlay Dorjee. Dr. Kinlay is an agriculture and development economist. He holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Switzerland. He has worked as country representative of WWF, Honorary Executive Director of the Royal Society for the Protection of Nature, and the Deputy Secretary for PPD in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forests. He went on to serve in a number of duty stations with the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, and in 2014, Dr. Kinlay was appointed as the country representative of the UNFAO in Kyrgyzstan. Our host is Dr. Phuntsho. He is founder of Loden Foundation. Dr. Karma is also the Deputy Chairperson of the team spearheading the development of the 21st Century Economic Roadmap. My closing. In terms of questions, grateful if you can be short and to the point. Please drop your questions in the chat box. Saring Chuki will be compiling the questions and will read them out approximately halfway through the session. Please allow me to end with a quote from the UN Secretary General. The COVID crisis threatens the food security and nutrition of millions of people. With concerted action, we can not only avoid some of the worst impacts, but do so in a way that supports a transition to more sustainable food systems that are in better balance with nature and that support healthy diets. Tashi Delay.
So, Kuzuzongbola, Doctor, and welcome to the 36th session of Bhutan Dialogues. The Buddha has declared that mind is the forerunner of all things. Mind is the chief and all things are mind-made. And this is a space that we have created with the hope to empower and develop that inner capacity of the mind through conversations, through discussions of particularly development issues and the processes of human progress. And we try through these conversations to stretch the boundaries of thought, to help young people broaden their perspectives. And today, especially, I think it's interesting to have real food as food for thought. So we'll be talking about food and what we eat. And if, as people say, we are what we eat, I think it's a very, very important topic, and it's such a great honor to have you as an expert on food and agriculture and on development. So I'd like to begin first by asking you how you came to be who you are right now. If you can tell stories of the big events in your life that has shaped you to bring you to where you are, to be our guest for this conversation on food security and food sovereignty.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Karma, and also thank you very much for Jerry for having me on this forum. I've visited the website. I must say I was not able to attend most of the live sessions, but I did appreciate the conversations that went on. It's an honor. Great minds have been here before me, and I'm sure there will be better ones. But I'm very happy to share with you my personal thoughts on food and what it means for Bhutan, and economically as well as politically and socially. To answer your question about where I come from and where I am right now, in terms of milestones, there have been many. Actually, I would have probably followed your path, because when I was born, I was slated to go into the monk body. Until the age of about 6 or 7, that's where I was headed. So from a very young age, I was taught all the scriptures, and I had to do a lot of the rituals and chores in the house. But the government of India's assistance program, I think, changed plans for me, and I went to Darjeeling to a boarding school in St. Joseph's North Point as a boarder, and then finished my high school education back in Bhutan. That was in 1973. And then I went on to Australia under a Colombo Plan scholarship. So again, development had the impact on my life, and there I spent 7.5 years. So, like 7 years in Tibet, I think I could make something about that. But I came back to Bhutan in '82, joined the civil service, worked in the civil service for about 16 years. Then I felt there were enough people, young people, to replace the aging person like myself. So I exited the civil service and went and spent very memorable years working for RSPN and WWF, and then went back to my old profession of agriculture and development economics in FAO, where I've spent over 18 years. And I've come back to Bhutan. It's been just over 2.25 years. And now I'm beginning to engage into the agricultural development situation more seriously, after having learned where we're at in terms of the food sector.
Yes. You have a wonderful background. You come from a district which is both rich in spirituality as well as agriculture. So I can see how your initial sort of monastic or religious spell and the long career you had on food and agriculture sort of blend well with your background. You have been with the UN for so many years, 18 years you said, and you were probably among the very few high-ranking Bhutanese officials in the UN. You were the representative of FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization in Kyrgyzstan. That was your last post. This year, as you can see from the banner, Bhutan is celebrating the 50th year of UN in the country. So if I had to sort of ask you to honestly point out what can the UN do differently going forward, especially FAO in Bhutan, would you have any points?
Well, I must congratulate the resident coordinator for having achieved the largest resource mobilization last year during the COVID year, and the credit goes to the team that he's managing. Very often, I think it's very easy to criticize, but I think you have to appreciate that Bhutan, as a small country, has to engage in multilateralism, and I think the UN has helped the country in dealing with that. I was the only Bhutanese staff in FAO for 18 years, and they were very keen to make sure that that Bhutan was not represented. We have this category of represented and not represented countries. The moment I exit, Bhutan becomes not represented in FAO in terms of international staff. But I'm happy that Forrester very quickly replaced me because he came in from UNEP. For FAO, I think they've been doing the best they can, but because of the resource limitations, I think it's difficult for FAO to enlarge the office here, and so it would depend on the resource situation, which I think is being made up to a great extent by other agencies which deal with food and agriculture. So overall, I think the UN system is doing very well. Of course, we can always do better, and I think in the future, as the RC has pointed out time and again, it's the climate financing that we have to look at, rather than the grants that Bhutan would have been entitled to under the LDC status. So looking ahead, there is scope, but you have to adapt, and I'm sure the UN is also going to adapt. So we have to be agile and flexible and try to stay ahead and think ahead and see how best we can work together. And definitely the UN is a necessary partner, not only financially, but in many other ways.
Yeah, I was thinking of bringing up this topic of ODA and climate finance. I think as Bhutan now moves from an aid-dependent to more trade-oriented status, especially as we plan to get out of LDC, what would you sort of recommend, or what would be the ways that Bhutan can sort of harness or capture the green investments, the climate finances?
I think beyond, before looking at green financing and again continuing to mobilize resources from outside, it's important to look at your domestic resource mobilization. And Bhutan has never had the need, because of the generous grants, to try and mobilize resources. So public finance and using fiscal and policy instruments to really become self-reliant in terms of domestic revenue, national revenue, internal revenue, is something that has to be looked at. But in terms of green financing, I think if you were able to tap all the opportunities that exist, but you have to be very quick, because the green financing is there for the whole world to take advantage of. And the sooner you can take advantage of, that pie gets smaller and smaller. So I would say we need to build the capacity to respond, a rapid response team, if you like, to be able to seize those opportunities on time. And that's where the UN system, with the technical knowledge, especially technical agencies like FAO, can give you the technical input which will give Bhutan an edge in competing for those resources. And Bhutan has, as His Majesty the King has always been pointing out, the advantage of the smallness, the networking, and the goodwill that Bhutan actually has from all the agencies, from the donors, and even individual non-traditional donors. So I think the opportunities are there. It's a matter of seizing them.
I mean, if you look at the current system here, you are very familiar with it because you have been in the government. Who would be responsible, or which ministry or department would be directly responsible for seeking climate finance?
I think the traditional planning commission, which has now mutated into the GNHC, which has lost a lot of good leaders that we had, and has now turned into bureaucracy, and I'm disappointed by the fact that this commission is starting to implement projects. And I think that is a gross mistake. I would have thought, looking at developing countries and the successful developing countries. And most developing countries, the Minister of Finance is the most powerful person. The Ministry of Finance is the most important ministry in any ministry, in any country. So I think the Finance Ministry should probably, hopefully in the process of this civil service reform, take up those responsibilities, and the GNHC should probably be relegated to the status of looking at non-economic issues, looking at culture, looking at environment, and really trying to coordinate. So, because the days of planning commission and 5-year plans are over, in my view, what is required is the annual budgets not to be simply a 5-year plan divided by 5 and then allocate and you haggle over, but the annual budgets should have substance. As you know, the treasurer in the UK or the Indian finance minister has a suitcase. Now, all those who have a stake in, be it in business or be it in farming, are really concerned about what it means for the upcoming financial year in terms of the support they get or the taxes they will be levied or any incentives. And I think we have to turn to that, because the annual budgets should be used to fine-tune the economy, to reverse trends that you don't want to continue, and to encourage uptake, upswings in the areas you want it to happen. For that, now, the basis for that is a lot of research, a lot of ground truthing, a lot of think tanks, a lot of analysis, and a lot of evidence-based decision making, which I think is somewhat missing right now.
So you rightly mentioned decision making. On this forum, we also hope that the conversations we get out here will inform decision makers or policies in the long run. And when you look at the current system of policy making, especially in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forest, which is the main, food being the topic today. Recently, I'm sure, Doctor, you must have seen the R&R Strategy 2040, which the ministry has just recently published. And it's a praiseworthy document in a way that I don't think there's another document which also takes the goal up to 2040. Probably this is the only one so far. But then in the task force team of 13 members, there's not a single non-government person. So is such a document inclusive in terms of refining the policies? You must have read the document. So what is your take on the processes in forming these policies? What can we do better?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the process, both formal and informal, that leads to policy and decision making. I think there's a lot of things happening which are difficult for individuals like us who have no official status and therefore no official access to documents. The R&R Sector Strategy 2040 was finalized, I think, as an internal document. So I would say it therefore has the technical content contributed by the technical task force members. But policy is more than technicalities, and I think the shortcoming there is, as you said, we should now take it and open up the discussion, saying this is the technical viewpoint, and very good suggestions from the technocrats. But we need to then really test this with the farmers. And I'm a true believer in the wisdom of farmers. And so I think they're the main group that we need to interact with. And of course, we need to have the views of all the other related government agencies plus BCCI. And I think most importantly, we need the views of the politicians, both the independent politicians who are up in the council as independent members and the 4 political parties. So what I would suggest is to try and get this this consensus building process going as soon as possible, and to create a draft and keep it a draft till everyone is happy with it. I think there's no hurry in, there's no point hurrying up and finalizing a strategy 2040 by mid-year or even by the end of this year. I would even go so far as to say finalize it by the end of the term of D&T, and that would be honorable, because it requires a lot more work.
Yeah, that document I was reading earlier today, and even in the executive summary, they mention a number of problems regarding policies in agriculture. And one very specifically pointed out is exclusion of stakeholders. So the document that was drafted by only government persons do mention that we have a problem of excluding other stakeholders. So I think what you point out is highly relevant for processing policies.
I would say if I was a staff member in the Ministry of Agriculture, I would understand that to be the exclusion of the Ministry of Agriculture in real terms from the due allocation of resources. Because if you look at even the roundtable documents, everything, agriculture is very important, very important, very important. But the moment you say, okay, let us now match that importance to programs and projects, the Minister of Finance says, no, but we have to give to education, we have to give to health, we have to give to trade. So that becomes rhetoric, not walking the talk. So I would say in some ways that's the exclusion part or non-inclusiveness. But I would criticize this document for the fact, although if you read the forward by the ministry, it says farmer-centric, we should consult, and I would praise the minister for insisting on having much more conversations with the farmers before it's finalized.
There's another aspect to this process of decision making and policies, and that is to do with data. You mentioned that in your article which you contributed to the Bhutanese in January. You mentioned several points, but one of them is having a agriculture census, R&R census, you say, of collecting data so that in the future you would be able to collect real-time data digitally. Give us a little more detail. What do you mean by agriculture census? Yeah. What would it take?
I would say all the documents you see in the name of R&R census results is a matter of interpretation, because technically from FAO's point of view, a census is more than current agricultural statistics. I would say most of what they claim to be census, and I have to also take responsibility as a FAO former staff member for not doing a complete agriculture census. But a complete agriculture census is extremely time-consuming, very expensive. So formally, an agriculture census, and there's a 10-year period when countries do the census, and then it becomes comparable data throughout the world. Now that process, like the population housing census that's been done twice now, is according to a methodology that is internationally approved. So the censuses we do here, first of all, for current agriculture data, I think none of the countries do it now, especially in Europe. They use GPS data to estimate how much wheat is there, and they will predict the yields, because it really doesn't matter whether you have 100 tons or 110 tons. What matters is it 100 tons this year, and is it 110 next year, or is it going to 90? And if it's going down, then you start worrying about how you want to correct this trend, or if something is being overproduced, you do something about that. What I propose in my article is much more intensive, and it would preempt, or rather it would obviate the need for doing all these surveys. So I know a lot of money is spent on surveys, forgetting about the time that the farmers and all the stakeholders spend answering those surveys, and all the pollution that happens with all these surveys going around the country. What I'm proposing is that I think we have about 25,000 farming households. They all be given these smartphones, and first we try to understand the structure. So we would spend a year actually looking at somebody's there timing how long it takes to milk the cow, measure the milk that comes out of the bucket, look at the hygiene, note all those things. So really going into the details, because just now when you talk about cost of production that the Ministry of Agriculture estimated, it's just something pulled out of the air, or and that's not bad generally for a country, but when you really want to do decision making based on that, then you have to be as accurate as possible, and it can be done, and it has to be done once. And after that, for example, once the farmers are all registered, they will put in all the information, how much milk they produced that day, how much wood they cut, how much they consumed, and one survey would be okay. On that one day, you say, okay, how much have you consumed? And then you're talking about the rice consumption, I ate this wheat. And then when you look at this big data and then disaggregate it, you will see the consumption patterns are differing. And then again, there you can make decisions on how to encourage certain combinations and discourage certain patterns.
So it's one big exercise initially, but it can help reduce a lot of surveys and work later on, you were saying.
It can prevent flows.
Yes. You've also been working recently on the R&R marketing strategy for the ministry.
Yes.
I mean, as we know, the agriculture sector is often perceived to be not doing well. Certainly, the contribution of agriculture to GDP has been dwindling in the past decades, and now when you even look at the amount of import we have of basic commodities, and then the number of people leaving rural farmlands to come to urban places or go abroad, there seem to be lots of hurdles in terms of agricultural development and enhancing production. Maybe it's the terrain, partly it could be the political environment, the legal systems, the market. What would you say are the main hurdles and the main ways we can sort of tackle them, solve them? If you were to pick one or say 2 to 3 priority problems and then suggest a solution to enhance agricultural production.
I think production is not a problem, even with the current levels of technology and all the constraints that the farmers face. It's the support, the institutional support, the policy support, the political support, and the trade policy support that is totally missing, which has led to this unsustainable situation of burgeoning imports. And in my article, you see this steep rise. I have to thank some of my colleagues for actually developing those graphs. The main problem with agriculture, or not a problem, but the main feature of Bhutanese agriculture is these are family farms.
Subsistence farming.
And the family farms have family objectives. And these are not necessarily commercial objectives. It's not profit maximization. It is to sustain their way of living, the independence, not having to work in urban areas under people. Independence.
Yes.
And as you know, people from my district, well, if they're in the civil service and they don't like it, they'll say, oh, I can go back. I will have enough rice to eat, and I can't put up with this this situation. So, by and large, I would say 99% of Buddhist farmers are family farms. So their thing is to perpetuate what their ancestors did, and that's a great thing because it's proven to be very sustainable. And fortunately, because of that, they have not really gone in a big way into the green revolution technology, which has had really bad consequences. In India, where it all started, and you have farmers committing suicide because of indebtedness and all that. So, I think we are in a very fortunate state where family farms are still strong, and as you know, the family farms are the foundations of our culture, and our food habits and all those are there. The suspicion I have is that the government, because neither the Ministry of Finance, neither the Ministry of Agriculture were really institutions that were driven by politics, unlike in Japan, Korea, and the US, where the farmers are very strong. And as you know, the farmer groups in these countries have undue over-representation in the parliament and other areas, beyond their numbers. So I've always been concerned that, our farmers who constitute 57% of the, account for the employment, and then they're really not represented, either in Parliament in terms of the debate, and definitely not in government in terms of policies that would really help them become viable, sustainable, ecologically friendly, producers of good food that can feed the Buddhist population. We've also been very liberal with the trade system and become over-dependent on imported goods. And I think I think the crux of the root cause of this is somehow we are blindly following a competitive model. We believe competition is good, but we have evidence that competition is really bad for a small society like ours. Politics is number one. Tourism, where everyone is undercutting each other, And in all the agricultural trade, now you mentioned this R&R marketing strategy. When I went around, I find that by farmers competing amongst themselves, they are losing out to the buyers who are fewer in number and syndicated. So those are some of the complexities which explain parts of the halting of progress in the R&R sector.
So you, in your article, I think you very clearly articulate how farmers should be involved, engaged, it should be sort of a participatory policy making. You also talk about this cooperative culture you should enhance. I want to get a little more precision and substance on your issue of the trade policy. So on a policy level, if it's not working, what can we do with the current trade policy? I mean, a lot of our farmers are suffering from competition with the cheap goods coming from outside. So how can we control that or reverse that, possible? What would be the fiscal and monetary or other ways to deal with this issue of imports?
When the rupee crisis first happened, I was of the opinion that devaluing the ngultrum, like Nepal did 50 years ago, one-off, would dampen imports because imports become more expensive and would benefit the farmers who are exporting apples, potatoes, oranges, and also we're exporting electricity. So the electric sector would also gain because, they get more in terms of nutrients. But somehow I sense that there's an assumed political sensitivity, which I would argue against, because Bhutan is, like all small countries, internationally negligible in terms of trade impact. So your trading partners will not worry about you imposing any tariffs or levies or weighing your exchange rate. The problem there is the monetarists who think that inflation is everything. Of course, there is a risk of inflation, but that inflation can be handled. It's a question of management. You have to manage everything. And that's one. The other one is, okay, we've tried to attain rice self-sufficiency for 60 years. And we are going down every year. So we could say, for the next 5 years, we will put a rice self-sufficiency levy on all rice imports. But then you have to have a understanding this levy is not going to go to finance ministry, who will then spend it on education or health. It has to go to financing rice self-sufficiency. Likewise, you could do the same thing with livestock, because we are importing so much meat. You could levy 100% livestock self-sufficiency levy on all imported meat, and like other things, if it's coming by air and it's very heavy, because again, you have to look at it in terms of public finance, progressive taxation, personal taxes, direct taxes, consumption tax, and then you would have to balance it out in terms of the impact on those who are not going to be able to afford those higher prices. But it will definitely benefit Bhutanese farmers. I also say that the two accidents in Bhutan have been the best friends of the farmers. One is avian influenza. Thanks to avian influenza, we are almost self-sufficient in eggs and poultry. Can you imagine all that income going out to India and some farmer away in Maharashtra from where the egg comes, and by the time it comes here, that egg is actually dangerous to consume. Then, of course, COVID. We've proven that Bhutan and Bhutanese will not starve if there is no import of vegetables. We have a very good agroecological zone system where if the marketing is correct, the government policies are there, and if you give the farmers the ability to manage, govern, and organize themselves, they will be able to feed Bhutanese with Bhutanese products.
So one of the challenges or issues that has come up often is if you stop import of foreign products, the prices of the local products become unaffordable to lots of consumers. So I think there is also the issue of our consumption habits, perhaps. I would like to discuss that further, but before we get into consumption, why don't we take some questions from the audience? So Tsering, if you have some questions.
What would be the top 3 priorities in food system or agriculture that is responsive to COVID pandemic, as well as to address the 12 5-year plan goals? And the second question is, farmers are already facing the impacts on agricultural practice due to the implications of climate change. How would you view agricultural practice in the climate change landscape? What do we need to ensure agricultural practice is sustainable?
Yes. So 2 questions. Yes. In terms of COVID response, now I don't know what's meant by COVID response, so let's take it as meaning if you have a lockdown due to COVID. Now, the 3 priorities would be to make sure that the agriculture and food system in the country is going to supply the minimum required calories in the first place. Calories. And therefore, if you look at calories, and friend Jerry from Ireland knows, potatoes are the easiest way to produce calories per hectare. So we have the solution to making sure that a population under stress is able to get the calories required. So number one priority is hone the system of potato production, processing, storage, and marketing. The other priority would be, we have this zoning system. We can actually produce vegetables throughout the year without much need for fancy technologies, just under normal conditions. We could look at how this could be promoted, but then where the system fails is if the buyback system doesn't work, as happened in the year of the COVID. But then if you let the farmers run that system by themselves, I'm sure they'll manage. The third priority is food stamps for those vulnerable groups. So it's like a social safety net. Maybe the poorest of the civil servants, wage workers, or unemployed tourist guides would be given food stamps. And those food stamps will be used to buy food from the cooperatives. There's no leakage of money, and the food stamps can be milgrams. We are not talking about, they cannot buy imported YY, they cannot buy Coke, they have to buy Bhutanese. So I would say those are the three priorities in terms of the COVID response. Just offhand.
That's fantastic. The second question on climate change and agriculture.
Climate change and agriculture. I think climate change, we've looked at, there's a lot of studies. For temperate countries, it's not so worrying. Again, we have this agroecological zone, right? We have this warming. So, in fact, for the cooler climates like Bhutan, it's beneficial. Suddenly, rice is more prolific because of the warmer temperatures, because one of the main problems of rice is the cold, icy cold water in the spring that affects the nurseries and therefore then affects the production downstream. There we have to calculate and see how to adapt to it. I think the biggest danger we all talk about is the glacial takeoff. Then the water stress issue. Is it due to climate change, or is it due to lack of ecosystems maintenance? Is it due to spiritually also pollution of certain watersheds? That's an open question. So climate change is such a wide term. We have to, if I had an opportunity, I'd go back and forth in refining that question and really trying to understand what the person posing that question would like to delve into. But so sorry for, I'm not trying to evade, but it is a difficult question to answer more precisely.
I think there's also a very general sort of notion in vogue that climate change is negative now and in the future. Perhaps for now, some places like my village have actually benefited from climate change with regard to agriculture. Sitting anyway, next two questions if you have.
What would be the alternative policy dynamic for robust and practical agriculture marketing strategy for Bhutan? How can farmers play the lead role, and how can financing or credit schemes be made better or farmer friendly?
Okay.
And the next question, agriculture has always received top priority of development since the first 5-year plan. Yet Bhutan is nowhere near achieving food self-sufficiency if we look at food imports. Where do you think we went wrong, and what can be done?
Yes. Going back with the fourth question, as I said, it's been given top priority in words only, not in allocation. I would contest that. The budget figures are available. The sector allocation to the Agriculture Ministry has been declining. And then again, to also go back to Dr. Phuntsho's thing about the contribution to GDP decline, that's normal. That's in the economic transition, demographic transition. It happens in all countries. It's a phenomenon we accept because the other sectors like power, tourism, of course, and now remittances coming in. That's huge. So in relative terms, going down, but in absolute terms, if it goes down, it's a worry, and that's where we have to worry about. So top priority, I would say that's not true in terms of the reality. It's true in terms of the rhetoric. You know, you'll hear the Prime Minister's statements, everybody saying agriculture is very important. And then when it comes to actual allocation, Minister of Finance will say, no, we have other important sectors. This is a priority. We've got this instruction from the Prime Minister. We've got this emergency. Now COVID has been is a windfall gain for the Ministry of Health. At whose expense? Not all the other sectors. So, you know, there's one pie, and it's, you know, it gets cut the way expediency happens. So I'm afraid, you know, the reality is such that agriculture is mentioned as a priority on paper, but not supported in terms of resources, in terms of actual policies, and in terms of trying to look at how to even support the farmers.
But isn't there also a policy in even considering some sectors as priority? Because if you look at the human body, it has to function as a whole. You can't say, I'll prioritize the heart and forget about the lungs. In the same way, when you have a society that is run through different sectors, why should there be a priority of some sectors? Other sectors are equally important, perhaps, for the sustainability of the economy, for the survival of the society. But anyway, Dr.
I agree with you fully, because the whole sustainable development goals, I think we are missing that. You know, those 18 goals are all interrelated. So the SDG 102 goal will depend on the other 16 or 17 being thing. So that thing about being given priority from first, we haven't received self-sufficiency. Why we haven't achieved self-sufficiency is we haven't put in place the necessary fiscal, monetary, and other policy instruments to enable the achievement of food sufficiency.
So, Doctor, with regard to the third question,
Yes.
the first to the second set, I think you also discuss in your article about how to empower the farmers, and you talk about a RNR Sector Transformation Act. So, if you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, for many years I've been thinking that the cooperative system, if you look at all other countries, is the way Bhutan has to emerge out of subsistence into commercial agriculture. I looked at Taiwanese agriculture history, I looked at Japanese, Koreans, and also the Australians and UK, when they were in a very early stage of agriculture market development. Their secret is, and I quote the example of Australia, you had these marketing boards, which are parastatals, through acts. So a cooperative, say egg marketing board, on which I did my thesis, all the members can only sell to the cooperative. They cannot even sell eggs to their neighbors. Why? Because then there's one seller, and then they start regulating the price. And if there's too many eggs, they'll process it into egg powder and dump it in Japan. So, it's clever marketing. And I would argue competition is bad for Bhutan. I would argue cooperation, collaboration is better. And if our farmers are able to, after act comes really collaborate, cooperate, and work together. And after all, as a GNHC, work compassionately and collaboratively towards the same goal, rather than trying to make a little margin here by trying to be smarter than the one-up. I think the one-up system is not suitable for Bhutan at all, and is not compatible with our values, both cultural, spiritual, and now even proclaimed GNH values.
Anyway, this would also align very well with, I think, the traditional community setting, because we have a very strong civil society culture.
Yes.
Not formulated in a sort of modern way, but in every village you would find the village Sokpa working together to solve the irrigation problems or build their temples and so forth. So maybe it's tapping that mindset, that cultural attitude, and then harnessing that for agricultural production. Doctor, I want to go to the second theme that I personally care a bit, and that's consumption. You discussed earlier about the potato example of providing calories. We have had a traditional society where other cereals like buckwheat, wheat, corn, millet were quite prominent. And then in the last 50, 60 years, it seems the whole nation has become rice eating. Consuming rice is staple. And in the economic roadmap that we have drafted, one of the proposals was, should we now steer the Bhutanese taste away from rice, especially imported rice, to a more healthy diet, maybe including potato, including other cereals, vegetables, fruits. I think in my own diet, rice constitutes less than 20% of what I eat. What would be your advice?
The best way to convince people to change their habits is through consumption taxes. So this rice levy would be the most effective way to solve the rice self-sufficiency problem, as well as to encourage. In economics, we all know about substitutes and complements. So if you're eating eggs, you eat bread, those things go along. So yeah, definitely substitutes. It's also a question of DBS trying to explain our traditional diets, and I'm glad to say that FAO now is going to actually bring out a food composition table, so that you know which dish has what nutrient values in them, and then DBS and others can say, well, if you eat your traditional diet of tsampa or kapchi and this for breakfast, that for lunch, and that for dinner, then you've got a complete, nutritious, healthy meal. So we need to have that thing. I think again, one of the issues is public health. Covers nutrition. Yes. Agriculture is not bothered about that. And Adam Smith would say, I don't care what, people don't care about what they eat as long as they can eat whatever they want to eat. But I think we are becoming much more knowledge-driven now, especially the younger people. I'm very encouraged by the fact that many are vegetarians. I'm personally a vegetarian for the last 13 years. And I think so. We individuals can determine the impact trade can have on our country also. But in terms of getting all the nutrients we want, I think it's there sufficiently, just forgetting meat, where we have cultural sensitivities in terms of culling and other things, and also the fact that actually meat is proven to be quite unhealthy, especially after a certain age. So, so I think just from the available fruits, vegetables, and grains that we have, non-traditional grains, like even millet. Of course, buckwheat is gaining popularity. Now it's become, used to be a poor man's food, now it becomes a rich man's food. Because, and the farmers are seizing that opportunity. They're responding to the demand. Likewise, I think the Ministry of Agriculture has done quite well, and OCOP, Her Majesty's project, is producing this quinoa, and that is perfect for high altitude areas.
Yes.
And quinoa could be propagated. We could probably get much more yak products, not necessarily meat, into the thing. It was an interesting meeting we had with the Yak Herders Association in Bhutan recently. They can be much more supplying. And then, of course, there are things like sheep dairy. So, dairy, sheep, goat, cheese, and all those things that are there, which can mix very well with the family farms and complement them. And the marketing issue I want to say here is if you follow the logic of having R&R cooperatives in the Geok, where all the products are coming to one center, and you are collectively sorting them out, grading them, weighing them, packaging them, you could get to a situation where you really get the highest quality products being sent off by air freight to good markets. And then you could get a situation where the rejects, which are almost going to go bad in 1 or 2 days, could be prepared and sent to the schools and institutions for consumption within a day or two, and charged about 10% of that premium price. Everybody gains. And so it's a question of having the system really well integrated, and but it has to be driven by data.
But isn't the terrain also a major hurdle in this? I think the transportation system adds a lot to the value, to the price we pay. So there, Bhutan may not have much option to solve.
That's why I would say perishable agricultural exports should not happen across the border by land. It should be air freighted. And I think there are niche, high premium markets that, and if you really calculate the cost per kg of air freight against it all, you add up all the transaction costs and the risk of pilferage and spoilage, air freight becomes economic. The other thing is we have to make sure that we are properly linked to all the potential markets, and that can come through the Royal Securities Exchange has set up a commodities exchange, which is online. They're a broker. They can contact a broker. So what happens is they take 1%, that broker takes 1%, the rest goes to the cooperative. Whereas right now, vendors are taking 300%.
Now, my final 2 questions to you, Doctor. What is your daily diet like? As a food expert, can you tell us what you eat in your day? If food makes who you are, we'd like to know what you eat, and then also other things that you do to keep fit and be on the top of everything.
Yes. No, I begin with coffee. I have tea in the morning. I have bread. I have kapchi. I have boiled egg. So something in the morning, but I get up very early, so I eat for quite a long time. So by lunch I try to reduce, and then dinner I try to keep it very light. It's all fruits, vegetables, some cereals, not so much rice, maybe 20% like you.
Nice.
And try to eat much more green salads if it's available.
How likely is it for other people from Wangdi to also reduce rice consumption and come to that kind of diet?
Very unlikely.
Very unlikely.
That's because I've spent time away from Wangdi, so I've become quite misfit in terms of the thing. When I go there, yes, suja and then rice and things, but then I try to. And in my family, we never leave even a grain of rice on the plate.
This is wonderful. This is, I think, perhaps one of the most important messages you are passing on, because I also, for many years, have been concerned with the waste, food waste that the Bhutanese communities, and even the government produces, the big luncheons and dinners with so much food wasted on the plate or in the dishes. So how can we bring back this regard, this deep respect our ancestors had for food? I remember the same with my granduncle scolding us for every grain that we would spill as a little child. Tsamba Rinpoche, the precious grain.
Yes.
So how do we bring that kind of culture and respect for food?
Well, through the education system, I guess that's where the things are called. Of course, primarily the family. The difficulty I see is that families don't eat together. It's no longer an important thing. And therefore, you know, what the kids eat and throw away is not seen and not managed with the parents. I guess the media has a big role to play in it. And what the Germans did is if you go to a restaurant and you leave leftovers, they charge you more. And there are some buffets where if you don't finish your plate and you have any leftovers, they charge you double. So I think
We should have
these things we should put in place.
Yes. So finally, a more philosophical question. Do you live to eat or eat to live? What would you believe?
I think we all have to eat to live, but some less than others. We are all individuals, and I think
So we eat to live, of course.
therefore, for me, I guess I live to try and make sure that everyone gets to eat. That, if you like,
That's
is my motto.
Yes, that's
And
good.
I think the key players who are not appreciated in that, the agents for making that happen, is not you and me. It's the farmers who are toiling away. And I think I would say I live to eat, and I would like the farmers to be recognized for the lack of hunger in this country. We're very fortunate, and just to also clarify a doubt, when I talk about the cooperatives actually managing the food system and the food marketing system, we're not talking about an import ban, but what I'm suggesting is that they be given the authority to import it. They be the main importers, like the State Trading Corporation is a state trading agency. So the Farmers Corporation of Bhutan, not FCE as of now, would have complete monopoly on imports of items. So then they can balance. They know from their data, few months from now, they're going to have these gaps. They will negotiate ahead of time with the best source of suppliers for the most safe food, affordable, to ensure that the populations get it. And they will target the institutions and make sure the institutions are not going to run out of food. And then just like ultimately, like just-in-time supplies, institutions would get their food, you know, almost on a daily basis, so they don't have to store, and then there's no theft, and there's no pilferage, there's no spoilage, and even hopefully semi-processed. This is where the young people are getting jobs in those factories, and the young people are really employed in the cooperatives at the Geo, Dzongkha, and national levels in really the high-tech area data support.
Yes. A fantastic idea. Culture of cooperation and collaboration. And I really like your motto, to live so other people can eat. Now we are going to ask you what 2 books you'd like to share with the audience. I think these are the 2 books you want to discuss that have...
Yeah, actually, this is a book I read when I was in second year university. It influenced me a lot because it really explained poverty in South Asia. Gunnar Myrtle, he was a Swedish agricultural economist, and he did a real inquiry into why South Asia is poor and why is there so much hunger and poverty. So that introduced me more to the political economy. You know, I was doing dry microeconomics, macroeconomics, international trade, which is, you know, purely technical. But here then you see the applied side of the economics, and then you also include the political and the social aspects. So that was a great book. It's available, but I think would not be of so much interest these. Then at the same time, John Kenneth Galbraith, he had spent some time in New Delhi, as part of the USAID embassy. He was also a great agricultural economist. And actually, this is not so much the book, it's the one that influenced me was The Affluent Nation, you know, and it talks about the waste in America. It questions capitalism. So I think they were very good books.
Thank you. I think you put a lot of focus on the farmers because they are the primary producers for food. And I think in the future, we should probably do a session similar to this in Dzongkha.
Yes.
Because most of them are certainly not going to be accessible, having the access to the English version. But for today, we are aiming at the educated audience, in particular the youth. And now, before I thank Doctor, I normally end the session with the Buddhist piece of wisdom. And today I'm choosing Nagarjuna, and I think a lot of Bhutanese would study this text, would probably know this, about food. Kaze menang dawar rigite, ducha shedang meber tengite, chakshir mala, nyimbi chir mala, chakshir mala lune bashikchir. Nagarjuna, one of the most important philosophers and saints in Mahayana Buddhism, he says, view food as medicine. Take it without greed and repulsion, neither out of vanity nor to show off or to be sturdy, but to sustain this body. So that's the piece of wisdom. And I know quite a few Tibetan lamas would actually chant this as a grace before eating their food. And this is really the mindfulness of eating. So, Doctor, thank you. Thank you very much for coming to Bhutan Dialogues and sharing your wisdom. Thank you. And thank you, audience, wherever you are, for joining us.